Oh, I need to fix that. There, good enough. Okay, I have no idea what's going on here. So I'm assuming I'm live, but for some reason, there it is. Jeez. There it is. Jeez. Sorry, everyone, that took a minute. Welcome to the Average Intelligence Podcast. I know, we've been gone, been going through some stuff, and I totally forgot to label this solo special. I will remedy that after the live stream is done. But we are here today to talk about Kamala Harris. But first, I have to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by both by the Arate Podcast and the Arate Podcast Pantheon. I'll speak more about each of those here in a moment. However, we are here, like I said, to talk about Kamala, but I also have to address something. This isn't so much a fuck up as a response to some comments a few days ago. Actually, I think it was last week. We uploaded a short where excuse me, I've also been sick. So I apologize in advance for coughing or sniffling. But anyway, we uploaded a short about this was talking about Dune, and I was talking about the names of certain characters, some of which were kind of like really exotic sounding. Arrakis comes to mind. Um, sci-fi soundy names. And then others are super normal, like Paul and Jessica. And one comment even said, Duncan, Idaho does it for me. Now, a lot of the comments were, and again, I have thick skin, I don't really care, but I would just like to clarify one thing because a lot of comments were essentially saying something to the effect of, like, well, yeah, but they're from other planets, you moron, or like, wait till we find out, this, that, and the other. And it's like, I didn't do a fantastic job of, well, I was also ignorant. But the thing is here though is like since seeing the first Dune movie, I've read more about it. I plan on reading the books. I've seen the second movie, and I now understand that the Dune universe is literally the future, the year 10,000 something or other of our same universe, and all of these people are humans, literal humans descended from Earth. So Atreides is a legitimately Greek name, and it would make sense that some of the more typical, names of today in the Western world are, Paul and Jessica. But then you would also have some, crazier names like. Oh. But anyway, just wanted to address that. So I was ignorant, but y'all don't have to be mean about it. You can just educate me because I wasn't a fan. Not so much me, but other people. And then the other thing I want to address is, whoo, boy, uploaded a short about Kamala Harris, and I'm going to speak more on this here in a little bit, about Kamala Harris never receiving a primary vote ever for president, not once, even though she's now running. This is the second time she's run for president. Um, and she is now basically the de facto candidate, even though it's unofficial. And she never received a primary vote. And whoo, some of the comments a lot of them were positive. Um, but like I said, I'm going to address that a little bit more later. But now it's time to start our deep dive on Kamala Harris. And I will say this, I was inspired to do this because there's a lot of information going around, and I like to fact check everything I can. And I apologize because some of these things I actually have perpetuated without doing my due diligence, and I will address those in this podcast. Others have been correct. Probably the most important thing I want to address, though, is I was primarily inspired to do this particular episode based on the Daily Wire series Scamala, which Ben Shapiro purports to expose, rather, is a probably more appropriate word, expose Kamala Harris for the fraud and scammer that she is. This three episode series was the political expose equivalent of the Hobbit trilogy, in that it could have been done in one movie and it was not particularly good. It was pretty underwhelming. He didn't, and in fact, some of the things he said were flat out wrong, which I'm going to address some of those too. Like inaccurate. So from a journalistic standpoint, it's like, really? Google's free. Like I got all the information I have, all of my sources. Um, I Googled myself, and I will give the sources, and I'm not going to put them in the description because I'll be honest, I'm lazy, but I will tell you where I got it. Um, but yeah, so Daily Wire Scamala leaves a lot to be desired. Um, After I finished it, I my final thoughts were kind of like, this is pretty desperate. They wanted ratings, and it wasn't very good. Um, but I did use it for a bit of an outline, so it was not a total loss. And I also want to say something here too. I was expecting to find a lot more bad stuff when it comes to Kamala Harris. Now, don't get me wrong, not a Kamala supporter. I am not. My major issues with her are policy, consistency, and just general. This is not valid whatsoever, but I've got a pretty good instinct I've seen over the course of my life when it comes to people, and I can't put my finger on it. I don't like her. I don't trust her. I think she's very fake, phony, and disingenuous. And I'm fully convinced that we will see more and more of that happening in the months to come. But one of the better examples of this are her wonderful quote that she loves that she loved. I don't know that she says it so much anymore, but she loves saying, "What can be unburdened? Oh, what can be unburdened by what has been?" And then another clip that's been making the rounds: "You exist in the context of what came before you." And that is almost a perfect microcosm of Kamala Harris insofar as she is a person who, and I want to say this properly, because I have zero issue with people changing their minds with new information. But I generally use the political term flip-flopping when someone, flip-flops all the time. They basically go where the wind blows. And Kamala Harris is one of the worst offenders I've ever seen in my lifetime of this. Several examples. I uploaded a short not that long ago, or a video rather. Yeah, honestly, JoJo, I think I don't know that I'll do it next week, but I am going to do a video on JD Vance because I've got concerns. I've got concerns. I was going to do another deep dive on Trump, but honestly, we've done so many. Well, yeah, JD Vance calling Trump Hitler. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, all politicians are hypocrites. But what I was going to say is, I thought about doing a deep dive on Trump, but I'll be honest, we've done so many Trump-centric episodes that I think that it's pretty well already been covered. So I'm going to like not to do Trump, but I will probably do JD Vance, not next week, but in the nearish future. Because I don't want to speak too much, and because Tim Wall's another good example. Like so before I get into, I'm not calling it stolen valor because I have a policy of not speaking about the military because I did not serve. I'm illustrating a point, nothing more. So the whole Tim Wall stolen valor thing is a lot more complicated than either side is owning up to, JD Vance included. It's more complex. It's not as cut and dry, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Because, like I said, I don't speak about the military because I did not serve. I don't know unless I'm quoting someone that was in the military, and then I just simply attribute the statement to them and nothing more. But that'll come up in the JD Vance episode. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, Daily Wire tried to do this big like tracking Kamala through the years. And again, there's some fishy stuff, but it's not so much exposed fishy as like obviously fishy, and you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. So the first thing I want to address too is that that's been going around. Trump was quoted as saying at a rally that Kamala Harris failed the bar exam, and she did her first time. But then she took the bar again because you can take the bar more than once. However, in my research, I found this is wonderful. There's a website, JD Advising, which looks as though it's a basically like a study course for the bar. Yeah. And they've got like a blog post on their site that's famous people who failed the bar exam. And I'm going to read this list of people, and I want you to see if you can spot the pattern. And this is obviously not a list of everyone that failed the bar on their first try, but it's interesting that they picked these people. Yeah, oh, you okay? You mean RFK Jr. or JFK Jr.? But anyway, so famous people that failed the bar: Vice President Kamala Harris, former First Lady Michelle Obama, Secretary of State and past presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, FDR, John F. Kennedy. Oh, okay, yeah, you never mind. Several governors, including former California Governor Pete Wilson and two-time Governor of California Jerry Brown. Several mayors have failed the bar, including New York Mayor Ed Koch, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, and Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Did you spot the pattern? Those are all Democrat politicians. That's a very interesting choice for the blog post there. So the next thing that Shapiro brought up was Kamala Harris's, well, I'm not even going to say association because it was a straight up relationship with Willie Brown. And I wanted to get a legitimate source on this, so I did. I found an LA Times article from November 29th, 1994, and the headline reads, More Brown associates get well-paid posts. Government, the speaker appoints his frequent companion and a longtime friend to state boards as his hold on his own powerful position wanes. And this is talking about um, Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, who, for those of you who don't know, Kamala Harris was allegedly, and by allegedly I mean she was, in an illicit relationship with Willie Brown when she was younger, and Willie Brown was married. Now, Willie Brown had a reputation as being a womanizer, but it appeared things that, according to the sources, it appeared that things were getting somewhat serious with Kamala, and I believe he was running for mayor at the time. Oh, I should have written that down. I apologize, but he was running for office, and the story goes that his wife basically clamped down, and he and Kamala had a falling out for obvious reasons. However, and as per usual, for those who aren't familiar with how I do articles, unless I specify, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I have highlighted snippets, but this is, and you can actually find this one. Wikipedia is a wonderful source because you use it as a skeleton, and this is one of the citations. So again, November 29th, 1994. Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, continuing his rush to hand out patronage jobs while he retains his powerful post, has given high-paying appointments to his former law associate and former Alameda County prosecutor, who is Brown's frequent companion, meaning girlfriend. Brown, exercising his power even as his speakership seems near an end, named attorney Kamala Harris to the California Medical Assistance Commission, a job that pays $72,000 a year. Now, remember, this is $72,000 in 1994. And it is also worth knowing, Shapiro pointed this out, that this uh, Medical Assistance Commission was made up of people in the medical field. And at the time, Kamala Harris had no experience in medicine in any capacity, even medical law, at least according to Shapiro. Harris, a former deputy district attorney in Alameda County, was described by several people at the Capitol as Brown's girlfriend. In March, San Francisco Chronicle columnist Herb Caen called her, quote, the speaker's new steady. Harris declined to be interviewed Monday, and Brown's spokeswoman did not return phone calls. Harris accepted the appointment last week after serving 6 months as Brown's appointee to the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, which pays $97,088 a year. After Harris resigned from the unemployment board last week, Brown replaced her with Philip S. Ryan, a lawyer and longtime friend and business associate. Brown is making the appointments at a time when his 14-year hold on the speakership is tenuous at best. The assembly will reconvene Monday with Republicans holding 41 seats and Democrats 39, making it likely the GOP will oust Democrat Brown as Speaker and replace him with a Republican. Quote, it's safe to say that these are not appointments we would necessarily make, said Phil Perry, spokesman for Assembly Republican leader Jim Brult, the frontrunner to replace Speaker Brown. Article continues, salary for the California Medical Assistance Commission is tied to legislators' pay. A government commission earlier this year voted to grant legislators a 37% pay increase from the current $52,500 a year to $72,000, effective when the new legislature takes office Monday. So a California state legislature makes, after this pay raise went into effect, $72,000 a year. And Kamala's new position is the same. Okay, so it is the same. So she makes as much as a state legislator, and you'll find out why I pointed that out here in a moment. The California Medical Assistance Commission, established during Governor Jerry Brown's tenure, meets monthly and is not seen as a full-time post. It is responsible for negotiating contracts on behalf of the state with hospitals to limit medical costs. So that position, that part-time position, was paid $72,000 a year in 1994. That doesn't sound like a scam at all. Let's see. According to the Washington Examiner, that medical commission met 2 times a month, and Kamala still missed 1/5 of the meetings during her tenure. And then there are some other very interesting stories for Kamala's various runnings for office when she was still in California, including one in 2003 where her campaign manager impersonated a rival to get inside information on the uh, impersonated a rival campaign member to get inside information on her opponent's campaign. Then also when she was district attorney, there were confirmed reports that she kept people in prison to be used as free labor, fire camp labor, which is basically, as far as I understand it, that is something that the state of California has, that they don't go out and fight wildfires, but they use prisoners to basically do labor for projects that help prevent wildfires. That is my understanding of what that is. Anyone in California that can correct me if I'm wrong, please do so in the comments. I apologize, guys. It hurts to talk. Ah. Now, another thing that has plagued Harris many times over the years. Oh, sorry, we're not that far yet. So, some other stuff came out about Kamala during her uh, presidential run back in 2019, because for those of you who remember, she dropped out in November of 2019 before the primary for 2020 actually began. During the debate, Biden alluded to a crime lab scandal, and this is from the Sacramento Bee. I apologize, August 15th, 2020. And this one, I'm actually going to read the whole thing because it's short. Biden, I skipped the very, very first part, but this was during her time as Attorney General, the state's Attorney General, and San Francisco District Attorney. So both of these tenures they're talking about. Biden alluded to a crime lab scandal that involved her district attorney's office and resulted in more than 1,000 drug cases being dismissed. Tulsi Gabbard claimed Harris, quote, blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. Biden's claim that 1,000 drug cases have been dismissed when Harris was a DA is accurate, although Harris has denied knowing about her problems with the crime lab that triggered those dismissals until the issue became public. Gabbard is correct that Harris did not pursue all evidence in the case she referenced, but the innocence of the inmate in question had yet to be determined, and still to this day has yet. And I'm going to speak a little bit more on this in a moment. Longtime San Francisco public defender Jeff Adachi criticized Harris's handling of the crime lab situation back in 2010, and during a January interview in the Sacramento Bee, the San Francisco drug lab was shut down after a lead technician who testified on behalf of prosecutors on drug cases was found to have systematically mishandled the drug samples seized from suspects, even consuming some herself. While San Francisco Police Department was responsible for running the lab, not Harris's district attorney's office, a court ruled in 2010 that the district attorney's office violated defendants' constitutional rights by not disclosing what it knew about the tainted drug evidence. So basically, what they're alleging, and I think what was proven eventually, was that her office wasn't responsible for handling the lab, but when they found out about it, they didn't publicly disclose it. Now Kamala, like I said, claims that she was unaware of this. And she was unaware of this happening until it became a matter of public record. Um, and I always love it when politicians do that. And granted, because it's like you can't win. So even if she didn't know, that shows incompetence because the district attorney doesn't know something like that until after he or she reads about it in the newspaper, or or she's lying. So it's not good either way. But the article continues. Judge Anne Christine Masillo wrote in her decision that prosecutors, quote, at the highest levels of the district attorney's office knew that Madden was not a dependable witness at trial, and there were serious concerns regarding the crime lab. That be a problem, which explains why all these cases were dismissed. And the Wall Street Journal reported in June that Harris ignored staff recommendations back in 2005 urging her office to establish a defendant's rights policy, known as the Brady Doctrine, that would have mandated her staff to disclose such information to defendants. Harris has denied being aware of the drug lab issues at the time and also noted that her office implemented a Brady policy after the drug lab scandal came to her. Now, this is where we get to one of the biggest, I'll just come out and say it, biggest pieces of misinformation when it comes to Kamala Harris. So this is actually quite complicated. So I'm not going to go into every little detail. However, you absolutely can. And this is the one that I'm actually least proud of, and I'm gonna eat some crow and own up to this. So a lot of people have asked me, why I don't like Kamala Harris. And one of the things that I cited was the Kevin Cooper case, in which Kamala Harris, and this is what Tulsi Gabbard was talking about during the debate. Kamala Harris allegedly withheld evidence that would have exonerated Kevin Cooper, who was on death row, charged for murder. Um, I'm just gonna come out and say it. It's not accurate. That is not, well, it's true, but there's a lot of context, and I'll be honest, I don't really blame her. And she actually later changed position on this, which nobody talks about. But so the Kevin Cooper in February, California Governor Gavin Newsom ordered new DNA testing. So this would have been February of 2019 or 2020, I believe. Ordered new DNA testing in the 1983 murder case of Kevin Cooper. Cooper came within hours of execution in 2004 after being charged with the murders of an adult couple and two children. Harris opposed the testing when she was the state's attorney general. She has since said she supports DNA testing and encouraged Newsom to approve Cooper's request. She did not offer specifics on why she did not approve the testing during her tenure. Actually, if you Google Kevin Cooper and you go to the Wikipedia page, it actually like it made me so mad at myself when I read the information about this case. The evidence against this guy was astounding. I mean, it was mountains of evidence. So I'll be honest, I can understand why a prosecutor would be like, "No," because there's a literal mountain of evidence. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's worth noting the new DNA evidence did not exonerate him. Except there's a lot of posts on social media claiming that the new DNA evidence exonerated him, and it did not. He is still in prison. In response to a request for comment, Harris's campaign pointed to a past statement where the senator called a New York Times columnist last year telling him, quote, I feel awful about this. The testing is not yet complete. Whether Gabbard's claim that the testing, quote, would have exonerated him remains an open question, which apparently it has been complete because it's my understanding, unless I misread, that it did not exonerate. In fact, I'm going to check this right now in real time because I don't want to misspeak again on this. So bear with me in my coughs for a moment. Let's see, Kevin Cooper. All right. Searching for it, searching for see. Now there was, to be fair, there was some fuckery and alleged evidence tampering, manipulation of evidence. I'm sorry, I don't want to keep you guys hanging, but he is currently sitting on death row. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find this. There was present both in years in front of three victims. I'm still looking for it. Been exonerated. That's Wikipedia again. Okay, so Clemency Pro fails to exonerate Kevin Cooper and quadruple Chino Hill's murders. This is January 15th, 2023. A fresh analysis of, of DNA evidence conducted as part of clemency bid for Kevin Cooper has failed to exonerate the death row inmate who made national headlines for the 1983 slaying of three members of Chino Hill's family and a neighbor boy, according to. Oh, you're probably not wrong, Gary. You're probably not wrong. The DNA quote The DNA evidence corroborates the testimonial, physical, forensic, and circumstantial evidence that was presented at trial, which was sufficient to persuade the jury of Cooper's guilt, even without the DNA evidence that became available later. Cooper has not established that the evidence of his guilt has been fabricated or planted. The evidence, including the DNA evidence itself, dispels the contention that the evidence was fabricated or planted. So, yes, he's still legally guilty. He was not exonerated. So if you see those posts about Kamala Harris withholding DNA evidence and the man being because the courts forced until the courts forced her to, I believe Tulsi Gabbard actually said the California Supreme Court forced her to, which is not the case. I believe it said Gavin Newsom ordered it, so I don't even think it didn't even go to the California Supreme Court. But and Kamala actually later would support, like I had read. So yeah. So if you see those social media posts saying that Kamala did that, that is not true. That is Kamala is not somebody that I like, but I can't hold that against her because she did not do it. Oh. So another thing that really seems to plague Kamala, and this should be very concerning, but hardly anybody's really talking about this, is the fact that both her campaign she doesn't do good she doesn't do well with staffing. Now I don't know if that's Kamala specifically or the people she puts in charge of her staff. However, it still falls back to Kamala because if it's her directly, then that's a major problem, managerially speaking. But if it's the people that she puts in charge of these things, which she tends to, as far as I know, her senior staff tends to be pretty much from the same group of people, including her sister, but anyway, that's also a problem because it kind of illustrates that she can't pick people. So Kamala's cabinet will very likely be a shit show. But we have an article from Politico, November 15th, 2019, regarding information about the Harris campaign. And again, this is a very big article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But as the California senator crisscrosses, this is during her primary in 2019. As the California senator crisscrosses the country trying to revive her sputtering presidential bid, aides at her fast shrinking headquarters are deep into finger pointing stages, and much of the blame is being placed on campaign manager Juan Rodriguez. Quote, "It's a campaign of id," said one senior Harris official, laying much of the blame on Rodriguez, but also pointing to a leaderless structure at the top that's been allowed to flail without accountability. Quote, "What feels right, what impulse you have right now, what emotion, what frustration," the official added. The person described the current state of the campaign in blunt terms, quote, "No discipline, no plan, no strategy." Oh, Justin made a comment, but I can't scroll down to see it. I'll address your comment. It's literally there's like icon in front of part of it. I can't. I think you're saying you kind of like her VP pick. Eh, eh. You just like him because he's close to Canada. Sorry, that was a cheap shot. This account is based on interviews with more than a dozen current and former staffers, as well as other close to the campaign, including donors. The sources were granted anonymity to speak freely about the turmoil within the organization and protect them from repercussions. While staff ire centers on Rodriguez, his defenders argue he has stood loyally by the candidate despite being relegated to a role akin to deputy campaign manager by Maya Harris. They say he's had to get Maya Harris's buy-in even on routine decisions, which were often slow to materialize, further undermining staff's confidence in him as a supervisor. The article continues. Aides describe a bleak environment in which workers have started to openly question the judgment of managers after seeing colleagues marched out the door. During a recent meeting, aides pressed Rodriguez and Maya Harris for answers about campaign strategy. At one point during the more than 2 hour discussion, Maya Harris herself turned to Rodriguez and challenged him in front of about 20 staffers and several more listening on in by phone. Rodriguez seemed unprepared for the exchange, according to people present. They walked out with little consensus about how to prioritize upcoming events and strategy around advertising. I'm just going to see if I have anything else highlighted for you or if that was it. Yes. There's more than enough blame to go around at the top, one aide concluded. Quote, "The whole campaign has been a bunch of people sitting around a table, giving opinions, and not backing them up when it comes down to it," the person said. I respect him calling them weird and speaking as a spectacle. See, that's one thing that's been kind of bugging me about not JD Vance as a candidate, but the race about JD Vance. Like I saw a meme the other day with him sitting. I guess his legs were too wide, whatever. But people are calling JD Vance weird, and I'm just like, why though? And nobody can tell me. Nobody can tell me exactly why they think JD Vance is weird. And they're cutting him up for sitting like a dude. Like I saw somebody showed it to me and thought I was gonna laugh, and I'm like, he has balls. That's why men sit that way sometimes because we have balls. Th- They're there. And I'm sorry, sometimes we just want to, you can't see that I'm doing it right now because camera cuts off here, which is a good thing because as professional as this podcast is, I may or may not be in my underwear right now. But sometimes we just sit that way. Um, and this is pretty typical and actually one of the biggest issues I have with Kamala, which I will address at the end. My biggest issue with Kamala Harris. And I actually have a resignation letter from a former campaign worker. I believe she was a campaign strategist. It says in the letter, but I will. Well, first, it's time to pay for the show. If you enjoy content like this, long form, introspective, caring about the facts, accuracy of information, you would probably enjoy my solo podcast that I do. This isn't supposed to be solo, but it is this week, so deal with it. But if you enjoy stuff like this, you should check out my solo podcast, the Arte podcast. It's only once a month, so it doesn't take up a lot of your sorry. So it doesn't take up a lot of your time, But basically, I have Joe Rogan-esque style conversations with people I find interesting, and I let people talk until they're tired of talking. So if that sounds like something you would like to check out the first link in the description. It'll take you right to that podcast page, plus some of my other, informative video pieces that are not podcasts, but are still fun and interesting, including my series, Five Things You May Not Know About whatever the topic may be. All right. So this letter, oh, it's his tendency to say weird sexist things. Even saw a clip of a female conservative pundit saying he needs to tone down the crazy cat lady shit. Um, Not gonna lie though, except he's kind of right because I mean, obviously not everyone on the left, but he, don't get me wrong, I have my issues with JD Vance, but I don't want to speak on him too much until I have a chance to do this amount of research. I would kind of like to find a left-leaning series that tries to expose him the way they tried to expose Kamala. And I also want to watch Hillbillyology or whatever it is, the movie they made on Netflix about his book, because I'm not going to read his book. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about. And okay, so I mentioned the Kamala video where everybody kept, okay, so I'm gonna backtrack. I'm gonna talk about JD Vance for a second. And I am gonna make this right, people. So the most recent short is one where I'm criticizing Kamala Harris for saying that 18 to 24-year-olds are stupid. And the number one hate comment is, yeah, you took that out of context. No, I did not. I absolutely did not. That clip is from a speech she gave in 2014, I believe, where she was talking about the need for criminal justice reform for young people. True, she said it with a giggle, but she meant it because the whole point of her talk was how when kids are 18 to 24 in college, they're referred to as kids, but the system treats them as adults starting at 18 and depending on the nature of the crime, sometimes younger than that, because you can be tried as an adult even if you are a minor, if you are of appropriate age and the crime is appropriately heinous. So the point of her talk was actually that young people are stupid. So yeah, I'm not going to take it back. But Justin does point out, I also saw the JD Vance clip about, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said people with kids should get more of a say, like their vote should count more. And I thought this was hilarious because I can't remember who. I want to say it might have been Ben Shapiro, but it might have been somebody else. It might have actually been Michael Knowles now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, regardless, someone said, well, yeah, but here's the whole clip. And the only thing JD Vance said was he said the bit, and then he said, no, I understand some people can't have kids, but he never actually retracted the statement. So yeah, I'm going to hold JD Vance to the same account. So look out for that. And I know I'm gonna get even more hate for that one, but it's what I do because I care about the truth. So anyway, this letter. So yes, Justin, I am gonna bring that up. So this letter is from Kelly Mellenbacher. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name, but that's I'm guessing. November 11th, 2019. To whom it may concern, it is with a heavy heart that I submit my resignation as State Operations Director. Oh, she was State Operations Director at Kamala Harris for the People, effective November 30th, 2019. This is my third presidential campaign, and I have never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly. While I believe that Senator Harris is the strongest candidate, no, you're not derailing. You're not derailing at all, Justin. I'd love to do a follow up on our episode because I've changed my position. So why don't we do it next week, bud? Wow, that wasn't even a Canadian reference. We can do it next week. Because as far as I know, Eric is still out for medical leave. I know we thought he was coming back, but he had a flare up, so he is still out. So yeah, buddy, come on next week. We'll discuss some politicking further. Then I am in. All right. And hopefully I won't be a coughing, hacking mess by then. Oh, sorry, I laughed. While I still believe that Senator Harris is the strongest candidate to win the general election in 2020, I know, well, I guess in a way she did, didn't she? I mean, nobody voted for her directly, but I guess she did technically win. So I guess you're calling it right. But anyway, I no longer have confidence in our campaign or its leadership. The treatment of our staff over the last 2 weeks was the final straw in this very difficult decision. This is one of the best examples. I don't, there's probably like a dictionary word for this, but basically like when somebody says something, but by saying it the way they say it, they point out the validity of the statement. Or I'm sorry, the invalidity of the statement. So she says she thinks Harris is the best candidate, but then she goes on to say that her campaign structure is so bad and is lacking so much leadership that she has to leave. Those two things they're not kosher. They don't go together. It is not acceptable to me that we encourage people to move from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, only to lay them off with no notice, with no plan for the campaign, and without thoughtful consideration of the personal consequences to them or the consequences that their absence would have on the remaining staff. It is unacceptable that we would lay off anyone that we hired only weeks earlier. It is unacceptable that with less than 90 days until Iowa, we still do not have a real plan to win. Our campaign for the people is made up of diverse talent, which is being squandered by indecision and a lack of, quote, leaders who will lead. That is unacceptable. But she's the best candidate. When morale has never been lower and additional people, even if only 3, are laid off, and neither the campaign manager or the chair addresses the staff to explain, apologize, or reassure us of the decision being made and the path forward, something has got to give. Presidential campaigns are incredibly challenging work, and for good reason. We're asking people to trust us to look out for them, to have their best interests at heart. Actually, they're looking for you to win an election, but campaigns have highs and lows, mistakes and miscalculations, lessons learned and adjustments made. But because we have refused to confront our mistakes, foster an environment of critical thinking and honest feedback, or trust the expertise of talented staff, we find ourselves making the same unforced errors over and over. And it certainly does not help the team to read about campaign discord in Politico or various other publications, because those with things to say have decided the best way to air their grievances is in the press instead of the leadership. This is not how I would have ever imagined my time at this campaign ending. And like I said, this was not an easy decision. I only hope my departure might result in some serious consideration of our structure, our goals, our internal communications, and what our organizational values are. We have really amazing people on staff, and I'd hate for any more to get to the point where I find myself writing this letter of resignation. Sincerely, Kelly Mellenbacher. Now, again, as Kelly said in her letter, campaigns are full of struggle and rife and, just problems. Any organization is. The difference is this seems to be a trend with Kamala, because I also have an article from Politico from June 30th, 2021. This is when Harris is vice president. Again, this is a long one. When Vice President Kamala Harris finally made the decision to visit the Mexico border last week, people inside her own office were blindsided by the news. Oh, and this goes in, I'll talk about the whole border czar thing in a minute. For days, aides and outside allies had been calling and texting with each other about the political fallout that a potential trip would entail. But when it became known that she was going to El Paso, it left many scrambling, including officials who were responsible for making travel arrangements and others outside the VP's office charged with crafting the messaging across the administration. The handling of the border visit was the latest chaotic moment for a staff that's quickly become mired in them. Harris's team is experiencing low morale, porous lines of communication, and diminished trust among aides and senior officials. Much of the frustration internally as is directed at Tina Flournoy. Flournoy? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Harris's chief of staff, a veteran of Democratic politics who began working for her earlier this year. In interviews, 22 current and former vice presidential aides, administration officials, and associates of Harris and Biden described a tense and at times dour office atmosphere. Aides and allies said Flournoy in an apparent effort to protect Harris, has instead created an insular environment where ideas are ignored or met with harsh dismissals. And decisions are dragged out. Often, they said, she refuses to take responsibility for delicate issues and blames staffers for the negative results that ensue. Quote, people are thrown under the bus from the very top. There are short fuses, and it's an abusive environment, said another person with direct knowledge of how Harris's office is run. Quote, it's not a healthy environment, and people often feel mistreated. It's not a place where people feel supported, but a place where people feel treated like shit. The dysfunction of the VP's ranks threatens to complicate the White House's carefully crafted image as a place staffed by a close knit group of professionals working in concert to advance the president's agenda. It's pronounced enough that members of the president's own team have taken notice and are concerned about the way Harris's staffers are treated. Simone Sanders, senior advisor and chief spokesperson for Harris, pushed back against the complaints and defended Flournoy, saying she has a, quote, open door policy and that, quote, black women like me would not have the opportunity to work in politics without Tina. Never mind Condoleezza Rice and many others, but 2001-ish, by the way. Actually, was she brought on in 2003? I can't remember. Somebody will Google it if they think I'm wrong. Of the chief of staff's anonymous critics, she added, quote, people are cowards to do this way. Well, unless you don't want to get fired or punished, you know. Harris and Flournoy's defenders also note that women in power, black women in particular, are subjected to standards that men often don't have to clear. A tough and demanding office environment may seem like as a virtue for one and a sign of disorder and lack of leadership for acumen for another. I'm going to address this real quick because I feel like this was probably true in the 80s and maybe even the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, although I doubt it. Here's the thing though, if you work in an office and your boss is a dick, it doesn't matter what gender they are. It's like I've been in workplace environments where the boss was a guy and he was an asshole and everybody hated him just as much. So a dick is a dick is a dick and a bitch is a bitch is a bitch and they're all the same. So if you're a bad leader, you're a bad leader. It doesn't matter what genitals you have. But for some people who know Harris best, it's because an all too familiar pattern for a politician who has churned through several iterations of staff on her rise and took office with a team almost entirely new to her. Just 6 months in, some of those aides in the office of vice president said they are eyeing other employment opportunities. Others have left already. In recent days, two top advanced staffers, Carly Setkowiak and Gabrielle DeFranceschi, or DeFranceschi, yeah, parted ways with Harris, and what they and Harris officials said were long planned departures, a point disputed by two people familiar with the matter. For DeFranceschi, the deputy director of advance, the departure came down to, quote, a difference in opinion on how things should run, according to another person familiar with the matter, who said that Harris's office is run, quote, very different from the Obama operation, where DeFranceschi previously worked. Quote, if you have an opinion about how things should run and it's not listened to, it can be frustrating. Sorry, just gonna keep thumbing through this. Recently, a Harris friend personally reached out to Flournoy on behalf of one of the party's top donors to try to arrange a brief meeting. They were ignored. The friend said it wasn't clear whether Flournoy knew who they were. The donor also contacted Harris's office personally to connect, and it didn't hear back for weeks. They eventually were told the VP was too busy to schedule some time. Oh gosh, I apologize, everyone. Quote, this is someone who has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions even, for your boss, and you're just blowing them off, the Harris friend asked. Quote, next time Kamala wants me for something, it's like, hey, I couldn't even get a call back from your chief of staff. Harris' staff struggles are nothing new. People who have worked for her in the past describe days as, quote, managed chaos. Quote, the boss's expectations won't always be predictable, said one former Harris Senate aide. Her presidential campaign operation imploded in a painful maze of finger pointing and leaks. Harris jettisoned nearly everyone from that campaign and returned to the Senate in 2020 with her government staff on a small outside political operation in tow. When she was put on the presidential ticket, she was given a staff of mostly handpicked, trusted aides from Biden world. It did the job. The team avoided the spiral of internal backbiting. Well, there it is right there. Harris can't pick people because when she was given a team, it was functional. So if Harris does win the presidency, her cabinet choices are going to be is going to be a bit of a shit show. So in a few other examples of Harris backtracking, so earlier in the primary, there were 7 women that came forward alleging that Biden sexual harassment allegations against Biden. And this is a fact check piece from USA Today. And I do understand the difference here, so I don't want to act like these are the same things, but I'm just going to read it to you, and you can do with this information as you will. Harris said she believes some, not all, of Biden's sexual harassment accusers. As the nature of sexual harassment allegations against Biden, now keep in mind Harris was a bulldog in the Brett Kavanaugh incident. I'm not even going to call it a case because technically it wasn't a case. It was testimony during his selection and confirmation to the Supreme Court. He was never on trial. As the nature of sexual harassment allegations against Biden have changed, so too has Harris's response to them. In March 2019, Lucy Flores, a former state lawmaker in Nevada, accused Biden of inappropriate touching and kissing her head at a campaign event. Following that, 6 other women came forward and shared stories of unwanted touching by Biden. Biden said his touching was about making, quote, a human connection, but vowed to be more, quote, mindful and respectful. In April 2019, Harris said she believed the women who said they felt uncomfortable after Biden touched them. Quote, I believe them, and I respect them being able to tell their story and having the courage to do it, Harris said. At the time, none of the allegations included rape or sexual assault. In March 2020, though, Tara Reid, not the actress, a former Biden Senate staffer, accused Biden of sexual assault. In April, Harris said in April, Harris said in a San Francisco Chronicle podcast she believes that, quote, Reid has a right to tell her story. Not that she believed Reid's allegation, which Biden has which Biden has vehemently denied. Quote, I believe that, and I believe Joe Biden believes that too, Harris said. She added she can, quote, only speak to the Joe Biden I know. Quote, the Joe Biden I know is somebody who really has fought for women and empowerment of women for women's equality and rights, she said. Now, it's worth noting that that it is worth noting that when she made this statement, this was when she had been tapped to run as vice president by Biden. So during the debate, she believed the accusers. And granted, I understand the difference. So I'm not saying this is all of it, but it's just do with that information as you will. And then the whole thing with the media now denying that Kamala Harris was named border czar. The media certainly called her that. Now, it is true that Harris was not tapped to quote unquote enforce the border. She was tasked to figure out, which this is even dumber. So she was tasked to figure out why people were trying to come into the United States from South America. You could have just asked them. I mean, they'll tell you it's better money here. Some people are trying to do bad things here, but the vast majority of people are trying to escape, you know, bad situations, bad economies, dictators, what have you, violence. It ain't that complicated. And I've said this. I actually had a conversation today with somebody about how the solution to immigration isn't easy, but it's simple. The fact of the matter is, you got a lot of people that are trying to come into this country, and if they could do so legally and it wasn't a giant pain in the ass, or if they knew how to, because there's a lot of misinformation for people trying to immigrate to the United States, they would. And these are things that could be pretty easily solved, including these asylum cases, which the whole thing could be streamlined so easily. But they're not going to do it because both the Republicans and the Democrats will never fix immigration because they need it to run on. every election cycle. So every 2 years, and depending on your state, sometimes more frequently, you're going to see immigration pop up as an issue. Nobody's ever going to actually solve it because they technically can't at the state level. Um, so it's a giant clusterfuck. But yes, Harris was called a border czar, at least by the media, and I believe by Harris or not Harris herself at one point, but I believe by the administration, but certainly by the media. And if you want videos, I can show you videos. Let's see. So I'm gonna talk about two things real quick that are probably my biggest issues with Kamala Harris as a politician and as a candidate, and then I'm gonna breeze through some of her social position, or I'm sorry, her political positions, so that you all know and can make an informed decision. But before we do that, have you ever had an idea for a podcast and you thought, wow, that would be amazing to make? But you just didn't know where to start? Well, I got good news for you. We can help you with that. The Arte Podcast Pantheon has brought you several podcasts. I believe the official count as what's available readily now is 8. By the end of the year, we should have 12 or 13, if not more, and we can help you at any stage. If you've got nothing, we're working on three now that started from absolute zero. And then Justin and I actually are about to start our Star Trek watch along podcast that'll be debuting on September 8th, I believe, whatever day Star Trek Day is. I believe it is September 8th. Our first episode's already been recorded and will be airing then, and we'll have several more in the can for you guys to enjoy every week. Whether you're a big Star Trek fan or curious about it and want to know some fun facts, we welcome you to that show. But more importantly, we can help you start your podcast at any stage. Whether you've already got an existing podcast and just want some cross promotion help, we can help you with that too. Or we can enhance what you've already got, get you some sponsors attached, and or like I said, from the ground up. So if you are interested in starting a podcast, second link in the description is the contact form for RTA Media. Send us an email and we'll get in touch. Okay, so I'm not sure which one of these I dislike more. Well, this one's shorter. So one of the issues I have with Kamala is she's not good at all about talking about her policy. And this is evidenced by, and I'm going to double check this right now because I wouldn't want to eat crow right now because I checked it earlier today even. So, if you go to Donald Trump's presidential website, on the first page, it has, his policies and his views right there on the front page. You can't miss it. It's right there. However, if you go to kamalaharris.com, you are met with a banner asking you to donate, which that's not rare. But when you close that and you go to her website, at the very top is the same thing asking you to donate. Then you scroll down, you can join the campaign. And then the links below, so there's a drop-down menu on the top right, is Meet Kamala Harris, Meet Tim Walz, Take Action, Events, Store, Donate. And then at the bottom of the page, we've got Store, Donate, Donate by Mail, FAQs, Work with Us, Your Privacy Rights, Terms and Conditions, Website Accessibility Statement. And before you say anything, I checked the FAQs. None of them have anything to do with her policy. None. Kamala Harris does not have a single policy view listed on her website. This is the first time I've ever seen that for any candidate running for any office ever. She's got nothing on her website talking about her policy ideas, her views. Now, I suspect it's a continuation of the Biden administration, but she hasn't come out and said it. The only thing she has come out and said that I'm aware of is recently she continued the proud legacy of the Biden administration stealing Trump era policies or Trump ideas and trying to pass them off as their own by announcing that she was gonna basically make it so that people there would be no income tax on tips, which Trump announced months ago that he was going to make that part of his platform. So it's and then JD Vance, actually, I will say this: as much as I have problems with JD Vance, but this was a baller move. So uh, I get he and Kamala had landed at the same place. I can't remember where now. God, I wish I could remember because it was. But anyway, they landed at the same airport, And there were a bunch of reporters outside Kamala's plane wanting to ask her questions, but she wasn't coming out. So JD Vance walked over and started talking to him and basically was like, well, since Kamala's not going to answer your questions, I guess I'll answer some. Baller move, just stupendous. And I've talked to so many people, and this, uh, guys, I'm telling you, the thing about Kamala is not good at impromptu speaking. She's just, and some people just aren't good at it. Kamala's particularly bad about it. And I've heard a lot of people say things like, "Oh, I can't wait for her first debate against Trump. She's going to destroy him." No, she's not. No, she's not. Because any of you, does everybody just forget about her VP debate against Mike Pence? Where if it hadn't been for the fly, like from a debate standpoint, which I didn't know, the fly was hilarious, but from a debate standpoint, he destroyed her. She had nothing. She had nothing. She's going to do a bunch of circle talk, and Trump's gonna get under her skin because Kamala Harris is offended by her own shadow. Um, so it's going to be entertaining as hell, but Kamala Harris's campaign is going to suffer as soon as she starts talking policy because she can't do it. Policy is bad and she can't do it. That's the big thing. And I'm going to talk more about her policy in a moment. And you'll see it is basically just a clone of the Biden position, which is effectively a slightly more progressive clone of the Obama administration. My biggest problem with Kamala Harris, and really the left and Democrats in general, so I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everything that they have accused Donald Trump of doing, in some capacity, the Democrats have done. And my absolute favorite lately is that Trump is going to be the death of democracy, the death of the democratic process. This will be, if he wins, it'll be the last election. Never mind the fact that he's already won and was president for 4 years and he's not president now, but never mind. This time he's going to take over. But so they keep calling Trump undemocratic. Kamala Harris has never received a vote from a single American to be president of the United States. She dropped out of the 2020 primary before the primary officially began. She received 0 votes. She wasn't on the ballot. She dropped out. She was appointed as Biden's VP. So that was the number one comment. People were like, well, we voted for her. Technically, you didn't. You voted for Joe Biden. She was the VP on the ticket. She was appointed. No one voted for her to be the vice president on that ticket. People voted for the Biden ticket, but that's not a vote for president. That's a vote for vice president. And then the Democrats did not have a primary because Joe Biden was the incumbent. And I'm not saying they even should have had a primary. Well, they should have because it was clear for much longer before that debate that Joe Biden was incompetent. Mentally, he was not competent to do the job. So Kamala Harris was appointed as the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Only at the Democrat National Convention will she receive votes from electors to be president. But no American citizens, like normal people, I shouldn't say that because the electors are citizens. The average American people in the various states across the union, the people themselves, the people, the we and we the people, did not vote for Kamala Harris to be the Democrats of the country did not directly vote for Kamala Harris to be their nominee. That's not democratic at all. It's even in your name. But I love the justification. The justification holds no bounds whatsoever. It's like, well, what did you want them to do? They should have had a primary because there were enough dissenting voices and concerns even before 2024. Before the election year, there was enough suspicion that Biden could not do the job that they should have had a primary. And if Biden had won the primary and then dropped out, that's a different story. It truly is. They did not have a primary. What they should have done, Joe Biden honestly should have stepped down earlier. They should have had a primary, and Kamala Harris should have been a part of that primary. She wasn't because they didn't have a primary, because the left in their hubris was so certain that Joe Biden was going to be able to stick it out. And probably their plan was to have Kamala, quote unquote, take over. Not gonna lie, that seems pretty selfish. As quickly as she was sort of slid in, that seems pretty evident. I'm not saying that is the case because I don't know, but all signs point to yes if I were a Magic 8 Ball. Um, so yes, they should have had a primary. They did not. RFK Jr. said they should have had a primary. He was snubbed. Tulsi Gabbard said they should have had a primary, which she's not a Democrat anymore, nor was she at the time when she said this, but she was correct. She was, and now she's on a terror watch list. So that's fun. And mark my words, I'm looking forward to watching the Democratic National Convention because I think you're going to see some fuckery similar to the 2016 Democratic National Conventions where some mics were silenced when people were trying to dissent vote for Bernie Sanders. You can look it up. So yeah, I think that's going to be a very interesting watch. So the presidential candidate that didn't receive a single vote from the American people thus far, to be a presidential candidate is going to defend us against the man that's going to destroy democracy. So yeah, okay. Alrighty, and real quickly now, well, not real quickly, but to wrap things up, these are some of the issues I have with Kamala Harris. And actually, I'm going to call out some good things too. So these are Kamala Harris's political positions. This is a Wikipedia article. Feel free, you can look up the whole because I'm not going to read all of this. On abortion, Harris supports abortion rights and is reportedly making reproductive health care central to her 2024 presidential campaign. Funny, you're vice president now. You preside over the Senate. Why aren't you doing it now? Oh, yeah, it's like immigration. You're going to use it to run on and then do nothing. As of 2018, Harris has a 100% rating by the abortion rights advocacy group Planned Parenthood Action Fund and a 0% rating by the anti abortion group National Right to Life Committee. On affirmative action, Harris opposed California's ban on affirmative action and filed an amicus curiae brief in the Supreme Court case Fisher versus University of Texas, asking the court to, quote, reaffirm its decision that public colleges and universities may consider race as one factor of admissions decisions. On capital punishment, Harris is opposed to the death penalty, but has said she would review each case individually, so it sounds like you're not against the death penalty. Robert Dunham, executive director of Death Penalty Information Center, called her positions, quote, a mixed record. As the district attorney of San Francisco, Harris was opposed to the death penalty, refusing to demand it against a man charged with the murder of a police officer. This decision was controversial and criticized by Senator Dianne Feinstein. As California Attorney General, she was criticized for appealing a federal court ruling that might have resulted in the abolition of the death penalty in the state, and faced criticism for not supporting two ballot initiatives that would have banned the death penalty there. However, in July 2019, as Attorney General William Barr announced the federal government's resumption of capital punishment nearly 20 years without an execution of a federal inmate, Harris criticized the move as, quote, misguided and immoral and a, quote, gross misuse of taxpayer dollars. As a senator, she also co sponsored a bill in 2019 that would have banned the death penalty if passed. This is also fairly common with the less like super progressive issues for Kamala Harris. In criminal justice, in December 2018, Harris voted for the First Step Act, legislation aimed at reducing recidivism rates among federal prisoners through expanding job training and other programs, in addition to forming an expansion of early release programs and modifications on sentencing laws such as mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, quote, to more equitably punish drug offenders. In March 2020, Harris was one of 15 senators to sign a letter to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and private prison companies GEO Group, Core Civic, and Management and Training Corporation requesting information on the strategy to address the COVID-19 pandemic, asserting that it was, quote, critical that you have a plan to help prevent the spread of novel coronavirus to incarcerated individuals and correctional staff, along with their families and loved ones, and to provide treatment to incarcerated individuals and staff who have become infected. In June 2020, following a campaign by a coalition of community groups, including Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti announced LAPD budget cuts of $150 million, which Senator Harris's support, with Senator Harris's support for the decision. Harris also publicly advocated for donations to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, a bail fund assisting those arrested in the George Floyd protests, the mostly peaceful protests with fire in the background. though she did not fund though she did not donate to the fund herself. Harris's criminal justice record has been seen as mixed, with critics of Harris calling her a quote tough on crime despite her claim of being self-described quote progressive prosecutor, citing her reluctance in releasing prisoners and her anti-truancy policies. Harris has criticized liberals for what the so-called quote biases against law enforcement in her 2009 book. On drugs, Harris did not initially support the legalization of recreational cannabis, but later moved to support it, which that's fairly typical with some politicians, especially around this time. In 2010, while she was San Francisco DA and campaigning for Attorney General of California, she opposed Proposition 19, a failed first attempt to legalize recreational marijuana in California, arguing selling drugs harms communities. In 2015, she called for an end to the federal prohibition of medicinal cannabis. So basically, she's she was against it, now she's all for it. On education, Harris has argued for treating, quote, habitual and chronic truancy among children in elementary school as a crime committed by the parents of truant children. She argues that there is a direct connection between habitual truancy in elementary school and crime later in life. And she supports busing for desegregation. Harris supports the creation of a government funding program to pay tuition and fees for students attending public colleges and universities for dependent students whose parents have incomes less than $125,000 or less, and independent students with income of $125,000 or less. The program would be funded by a fee on Wall Street firms of 0.5% per stock trade. And regarding student loans, Harris has proposed having up to $20,000 in student debt forgiveness for Pell Grant recipients who start a business and operate it for at least 3 years in a disadvantaged community. Which, with the current gun laws in a lot of these disadvantaged communities, you would be fucking insane to do so. Eligible students would also have loans deferred interest free for a business formation period of up to 3 years. On election security, on December 21st, 2017, Harris was one of the 6 senators to introduce the quote Secure Elections Act, legislation authorizing block grants for states that would update outdated voting technology. The bill, if passed, would have also created a program for an independent panel of experts to develop cybersecurity guidelines for election systems that states could adopt if they choose, along with offering states resources to implement the recommendations. In March 2019, Harris told Jimmy Kimmel that she was open to discussing abolishing the Electoral College, given that there was, quote, no question that the popular vote has been diminished in terms of making the final decision about who's the president of the United States, and we need to deal with that. It was never. It never was, Kamala. Tell me you don't know how your government works without saying you don't know how your government works. Oh, let's see. On gun, well, we all know. The only thing I have is Harris consistently supported gun control has been graded with an F rating from the NRA. Let's see. Just saying. Yeah, she's very, very. Oh, and then and during a 2019 appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, Harris explained her support for a mandatory buyback on assault weapons. Quote, I do believe that we need to do buybacks, and I'll tell you why. First of all, let's be clear about what assault weapons are. Really, I doubt you are. They have been designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly. They are weapons of war with no place on the streets of a civil society. CNN reported in May 2019 that Harris's new proposal would ban AR-15 style assault weapon imports. A lot of them are made here, but good try. On immigration, as a senator, Harris was an outspoken critic of the Trump administration's treatment of people, especially pregnant women, trying to immigrate to the U.S. seeking asylum in the U.S. In April 2018. Harris was one of the 5 senators to send a letter to Thomas Homan, acting director of ICE, on standards used by the emergency when determining how to detain pregnant women. And then there's a long paragraph that goes into it. Basically, Harris was really critical of Trump about separating families, but as we saw with the now famous video of AOC trying to, I believe it was the same person, of AOC trying to grill that man, and he said, if you are arrested for a DUI and you have a child in your car, you are separated from that child. Now, I'm not even gonna, it's different. But again, the immigration policy is not easy, but it is simple. Harris has supported the DREAM Act. She had a lot of things to say about in November 2019, ICE had put thousands of immigrants in solitary confinement. In January 2019, Harris was one of 20 senators that sponsored the Dreamer Confidentiality Act, which I actually do like this. A bill that, if passed, would have banned the Department of Homeland Security from passing information collected on DACA recipients to Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, ICE, Border Patrol, the Department of Justice, or any other law enforcement agency with exceptions in the case of fraudulent claims, national security issues, or non-immigrant related felonies being investigated. I actually do like that. Kind of wish that had been a thing. In June, I also liked it. In June of that year, following the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's confirmation that DACA recipients did not meet eligibility for federal backed loans, Harris and 11 other senators introduced the Home Ownership Dreamers Act, legislation that, if passed, would have prevented the Federal Housing Administration, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Agricultural Department from denying mortgages solely due to the immigration status of an applicant. So then I also like good on this. In August 2019, after the Trump administration released a new regulation imposing the possibility that any green card and visa applicants could be turned down in the event that they have low incomes or little education and have used benefits such as food stamps and housing vouchers. Oh, you know what? I take that back. I don't support that. Well, because Harris tore it apart. And I also misread. I didn't see applicants. I thought it had. I apologize. I misread and thought it said recipients. Let's see. Oh, and then in 2006, when she was San Francisco's DA, she expressed support for her city's sanctuary city policy. And then on LGBT rights, that's hilarious. Like, we all know that. However, this is interesting. Harris has faced criticism for a 2015 federal court motion she filed to block gender affirming medical care for a transgender inmate serving in California State Prison while Harris was serving as California Attorney General. After the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had ruled that denying that treatment violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. And originally, back in 2008, she was against decriminalizing sex work, but has since changed her opinions. On voting rights, Harris attributed the 2008 gubernatorial losses of Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum in Georgia and Florida, respectively, to voter suppression. But everything was kosher for president in Georgia. Everything was kosher there, but there was voter suppression for these governor seats. Yeah. In 2020, along with the House Whip Jim Clyburn and Marcia Fudge, Harris introduced the Vote Safe Act, which proposed uniform national standards for all the registered voters to use mail-in absentee voting. A minimum early in-person voting period of 20 days and $5 billion in funding and grants to states to increase the safety and availability of voting amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. On economic issues, Harris identifies as a social democrat and has said that she is not a socialist but insists that more needs to be done to ensure equal opportunities, particularly for working people. On campaign finance, Harris's 2020 presidential campaign disavowed most corporate donations and committed to rejecting money from corporate political action committees instead relying on individual donors. However, it is worth knowing Harris, along with candidates Cory Booker, Julian Castro, or maybe it was Julian. I think Julian Castro is how he says his name. Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Marianne Williamson has explicitly discouraged single candidate super PACs from operating on her behalf, though she cannot prevent them from doing so. Let's continue here. Sorry, I just got a message from my buddy Max. He's got a question, or my friend Virus. He's got a question for me. And I mean, we know about her COVID-19, we know where she was. And then on disaster relief, she basically just cut Trump. So that kind of stuff. And like I said, you can find all this on Wikipedia. In January 2020, she was one of 10 senators to vote against the USMCA, the United States Mexico Canada Agreement, stating, quote, by not confronting climate change, the USMCA fails to meet the crises of the moment. And we all know Kamala Harris has long time been a proponent of Medicare for all. Yeah, so that's nothing new. And we know where she stands on housing and labor unions. Again, she's right in line with Biden, if not even a little bit more progressive. So this one's interesting. In July 2019, Harris signed a letter to the United States Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta, that advocated for OSHA to initiate a full investigation into a complaint filed on May 20th by a group of Chicago area employees of McDonald's, which detailed workplace violence incidents that included interactions with customers, such as customers throwing hot coffee and threatening employees with firearms and more. The senators argued that McDonald's could and needed to, quote, do more to protect its employees, but employers will not take seriously their obligations to provide safe workplace if OSHA does not enforce workers' rights to a hazard-free workplace. Now, let me ask you a question. I would think that it's probably a smidge more likely that, oh, I don't know, um, not letting people, you have some of the strictest gun laws and yet some of the most violence. I don't know, maybe cops? Just the thought, maybe actually prosecuting people. I lost my paper. So that's, but yeah, blame McDonald's. Blame McDonald's for not taking bullets for people when, you know, it's not the guns, it's enforcement. It's just the fact that it's in Chicago. And workplace harassment. So for on foreign policy, specifically presidential war powers, I actually agree with her on this. In September 2019, the New York Times issued a questionnaire, including the question, quote, under what circumstances other than a literally imminent threat to the United States, if any, does the Constitution permit a president to order an attack on another country without prior congressional authorization? What about bombing Iranian and North Korean nuclear facilities? Harris answered, quote, the president's top priority is to keep America secure, and I won't hesitate to do what it takes to protect our country in the face of an imminent threat in the future. But after almost 2 decades of war, it is long past time for Congress to rewrite the authorization for use of military force that governs our current military conflicts. The situations in Iran and North Korea would require careful consideration of all the surrounding facts and circumstances. I actually do agree with that statement because I do think the president now, thanks to things like the Patriot Act, the president now has far too much power to wage war basically anywhere in the world, conduct military operations. Harris condemned the Chinese government's abysmal human rights record when it comes to the Uyghur Muslims and other things in general. Oh, Let's see here. And then a lot of the other stuff is just kind of uneventful. But I did want to point out specifically when it comes to Israel. So she's actually a bit more pro-Israel than people would have you believe, particularly on the right, because in 2019 she opposed the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement targeting Israel. She was a co-sponsor of a Senate resolution expressing objection to the UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which condemned Israeli settlement building in the West Bank as a violation of international law. She opposed that. And recently she has come out and said that there needs to be a ceasefire, but she did say part of that ceasefire agreement that both parties need to agree to is the release of all hostages immediately. So props for that. In March 2024, in remarks to Edmund Pettus Bridge, Selma, Alabama, oh, that was, I just talked about that. When it comes to Iran, this is where the stupid river flows. Harris supported the Iran nuclear deal. When Trump announced that the United States was withdrawing from it, Harris released a statement saying the decision, quote, jeopardizes our national security and isolates us from our closest allies. Iran? Okay. While calling the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, quote, the best exciting tool we have to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons and avoid a disastrous military conflict in the Middle East. In 2019, Harris said she would rejoin the agreement and expand it to cover ballistic missile testing. You don't say. You know, ballistic missile testing. You don't say. Hmm. Funny that. Yes, we're going to prevent them from creating a nuclear bomb by giving them money and nuclear material, but it's okay because it's for energy. Oh, 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 wow, I'm sorry, that hurts. And in the wake of the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Iranian Quds Force, Harris joined her Senate colleagues in introducing the No War Against Iran Act and condemning Trump's, quote, dangerous escalation of the Iranian regime. And then the Biden administration gave them money, which they then used to funnel to terror groups, including Hamas and the Houthis. Which, fun fact, she voted in 2018 to withdraw U.S. military aid for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, which was against the Houthis. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of Saudi Arabia, but it's a little bit more nuanced. And then on climate change, we know where she stands on that. She supported the green. She supported the green. She supported the Green New Deal. And that's pretty much it. Thankfully, wow, I'm actually losing my voice. I apologize for that. Well, as you can hear, I need to wrap it up, so I will do just that. But thankfully, I got through all the information that I wanted to. So I will say, do your own research. You can learn more about Kamala Harris. You want to join the discussion? Let me know, put it in the comments. We'll be there. Check out the Arte podcast and the Arte podcast Pantheon if you would like to start a podcast. And we will see you guys next week. We'll be joined again by our friend Justin to discuss some more politics.